Welcome back to a numbers game with Ryan Gordusky. Thank you guys for being here. Is the 2024 Trump coalition ending? That's the question I'm going to pose to everybody because that is what the media is saying. This all comes from the New York Times Siena poll that I mentioned to my audience on Friday's episode. First, I want to say that I know a lot of people are down on polls, right? I get it. They messed up a lot in the last 10 years. And there's a lot of nonsense that comes from the polling industry. So I'm not unaware of it and I'm not biased in saying that all polls are good. There's a lot of bad stuff out there. But we have to take certain polls seriously, not only because there is some truth to them. There's an underlying truth that they are correct more than they are wrong, even though when they're wrong, they're really wrong. But it's also from the fact that they are taken seriously by the media and they create the narratives that we all live with and then the mainstream believes, right? So despite whatever you feel about polling, despite how much you may not like a poll or sit there and say, oh, it's a New York Times poll, therefore it's going to be liberal. And I find the New York Times poll is not, I mean, they do some things that I don't like, but as far as like the wonkiness of the poll, but what they what they do is they are transparent and they're attached to the biggest newspaper in the country. So therefore, alone, it's worth to go through it to find what they're talking about and then to either correct it, dispel it, or sit there and say, yeah, this is the truth. And either I have to accept it or I should promote it because it agrees with me. So my question comes from the article published by Nate Cohn. Nate's a very smart data analyst for the Times. He's actually been right quite a bit in the last few years. Cohn wrote an article, The Voters Who Have Taken a U-Turn on Trump, and it detailed how voters have shifted big against Trump. They shifted for Trump, rather, in 2024. Now they're shifting away from Trump based on his favorability ratings, his current favorite ratings, which stand at 40%, according to the Times. So according to the Times, and I'm going to post the image on the YouTube video if you're not able to, if you're just listening to this, I'll show it on the YouTube video. The Times Cicerone shows that there is a big swing among non-white voters and voters among the ages of 18 to 29, that they are moving further against Trump than the general public, and they're actually responsible for a big part of the movement against Trump. Naturally, liberals are celebrating. Greg Sargent from the New Republic exclaimed on Twitter that the MAGA was dead, that the long-lasting national nightmare was over, and that the coalition of the ascendant is basically back in action, Obama's coalition, that really America wasn't upset about immigration, and really they weren't changing their opinions about illegal immigration. They really wanted Joe Biden's immigration, is what he's saying. And while the data seems overwhelming, not just from this poll, but from others as well, that young people and minorities are souring on Trump, the vibe has shifted, as the kids say, that doesn't mean that they're going back to Democrats, right? So I started looking at the New York Times poll, all the cross tabs of the New York Times poll, because cross tabs are sexy, even though they say don't look at them. I look at them all the time. They say I started looking through the cross tabs of the New York Times poll and the exit polls created by Pew Research in the 2016, 2018, 2020, and 24 elections to sit there and say, where do these groups line up in historical context, right? I know this is very nerdy, and this segment is going to be especially nerdy, everyone, so brace yourself for it. But I sat there and said, where do these numbers look historically, right? Let's say they're souring on Trump from where they were in 2024, where he was at an all-time high with these groups. Are they back to Democrats? So let's start with Hispanics. In 2016, Hillary Clinton won Hispanics by 38 points. And in 2018, Democrats in that wave election won them by 47 points, according to these exit polls by Pew Research, remember. In 2020, Biden won them by 25 points. And in 2024, Harris by just 3 points. The New York Times poll says now Democrats are beating Republicans among Hispanics by 16 points. 16 points is worse than Harris got, or was more Democrat than the 2024 election that Harris was in by 13 points, but it is better than every other election besides the Harris one. It is a 31-point swing from the last midterm elections where Trump was the president. Now let's look at 18 to 29-year-olds, many of whom are minorities, are Hispanics. Hillary won 18 to 29-year-olds by 30 points. In 2018, Democrats won them by 49 points. In 2020, Biden won them by 26 points. And in 2024, Harris won them by 19 points. The New York Times says that Democrats right now are projected to win them by 27 points in the midterms. 27 points is a big win. It's about where Biden was in 2020. It's also 22 points to the right of where Democrats were back in 2018. It is also 3 points to the right of where they were with Hillary Clinton. Now let's take a look at black voters. Hillary won black voters by 85 points. In 2018, they won them by 86 points. In 2020, Biden won by 84 points. In 2024, Harris won them by 68 points. It's a big, big, big change from the previous elections. The New York Times currently have Democrats winning the black vote by 55 points. That is a wild 31-point swing from 2018. That is actually worse than they were doing under Harris. And what about men? Let's talk about men because they're a huge part of the Trump coalition. Trump won men by 11 points in 2016. Democrats actually won men by 2 points in 2018. Trump won them by 12 points in 2020 and 12 points again in 2024. The New York Times poll had them up as Republicans winning them by 6 points in 2026. That's an 8-point jump from 2018. Yeah, it's worse than Trump did, but it's not worse than they were in 2018, this reversion. There's a big possibility that younger men and minority men, Hispanic men, really haven't left the Trump coalition. Let's talk about white voters, the biggest part of Trump's base. Trump won white voters by 15 points in 2016. Republicans won them by 6 points in 2018. Trump won them again by 12 points in 2020 and 2024. New York Times have whites voting for Republicans by 7 points, basically unchanged from 2018. There's no mass reversion of that demographic to be more liberal than they were. And I want to talk about 2 other groups. College-educated whites, the big liberal group. Remember, Hillary won them by 21 points in 2016, Democrats by 26 in 2018, Biden by 15, Harris by 12. This poll has Democrats winning by 23 points. I think that's maybe overstating it, but whatever. I don't know why I'm whispering. But over 23 points. That's still 3 points better than 2018. And last of the 2 I want to talk about is women. Hillary won women by 15 points, Democrats by 18 points in 2018, Biden by 11, Harris by 7. This poll has Democrats leading by 16, better than Hillary, Biden, Kamala, but not as good as Democrats in 2018 still. These levels are not at 2018 levels. And I have a suspicion this is a problem with the New York Times Siena poll that is very frequent, is that when they sample women and they sample college educated, there's a large overlap. So in many of their polls, they are oversampling liberal women. And that's why a lot of times in their polling, like in 2024, that was always a big outlier. I'm not going to sit there and be a poll truther, but it's something that I think about all the time when there's this overly large number coming from these 2 demographics. It's usually because they are overlapping and they're asking the same people in those 2 demographics. Anyway, my point is being that all these cross tabs, all the numbers and the different demographics are showing a trajectory that, yes, Republican growth from 2024 has gone back. We've definitely lost some ground since 2024. That being said, they are a lot better among most of those key demographics from 2018 by 20 points in many cases. Politics like life is not a straight trajectory. It is a roller coaster. There's ups, there's downs, there's ups, there's downs. It's not going to be one continuous thing. Think about the white non-college educated vote. The vote that Richard Nixon brought to the Republican Party and Ronald Reagan used to win a 49-state landslide like Richard Nixon. They went back to Democrats for Bill Clinton. Does it mean that they were never going to end up where they ended up? No, of course not. Of course, they were going to be the backbone of the Republican Party. But there's ups and downs. There's ebbs and flows. I mean, that's just how it is. Like, that's just how politics and life works. You can't sit there and give the opinion that it's all over because one bad poll comes, especially when you compare the poll to other exit polls, when that's what the story, they're making the case that, oh, look, compared to this one exit poll, it's showing a complete backslide. But when you look just 2 elections, 3 elections, 4 elections out, it shows actually the trajectory is in the way for the Republicans. So do I think, by the way, one last point I want to make, do I think that this is, going in this and back towards Republicans and this general movement towards Republicans is indefinite, that some of these Trump voters aren't up for grabs in the future? No, I do not. I've said this on many times on this podcast and on other shows. I think there's a lot of open questions of the future of the GOP where these voters could leave for good. I think AI is one of those issues. I've said it over and over again. What happens if the youth unemployment is 20 to 25% because of AI? you're going to have a ton of pissed off Gen Zers and their parents demanding some kind of change. And Democrats like Congressman Ro Khanna, who was on this podcast, said that they are using AI and the fear of job displacement as the mechanism to have real socialism in this country. I think that Trump is a huge blind spot for the Trump administration. I've said it over and over again. I hope that they have a plan to fix it. I don't know if they do, but I think that there are many things that Republicans can lose these voters on. As of right now, I don't think that they have. But if Democrats see this poll and come to the conclusion that 2024 was just a fever dream and everything goes back to the normal and Americans really just want Joe Biden's immigration policy without the high inflation, they are wrong. This is the new normal. Even if for one election, it doesn't look like it. That's the way the cookie crumbles, whether they like it or not. This is the new party, the way it's moving. One poll in one election does not therefore make a trend. All right. With me today is my very good friend, the incredible author, writer, bestseller, provocateur, Ann Coulter. She's coming up next to talk about her new column and mass immigration deportations. Stay tuned. Ann Coulter is a household name who's written more New York Times bestsellers than I can count. My favorite is Demonic. I always highly recommend it to people if they want a great introduction on mob think and the French Revolution. Fantastic book. She also has an incredible Substack that I cannot recommend enough called Unsafe. You should all try to subscribe to it to read her weekly columns and video interviews. And I want to thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I know we both try to avoid podcasters interviewing other podcasters, but I really it's been driving me crazy that the media have actually pulled off this total mind wipe of two of the most important historic events in history. And I mentioned it in a column, I don't know, last year when Trump sent the troops into LA, but it hasn't really caught on. So I wrote about it again this week, a little more stridently. And I just want to get it to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
So let's talk about that op-ed. So you write in your new op-ed on Unsafe, the Substack, that how progressives have a narrative around MLK Day that the anti-ICE protesters are actually really living up to MLK's legacy. That is a completely original thought that they haven't attributed to any other protesters on the left. My first question to you, Ann, is that the left seems to believe that all of history comes down to the civil rights movement, slavery, World War II, and the Red Scare. Are there any other historical times that matter to them, and why is that comparison a fallacy?
That's a fantastic question. Yes, they do seem to think that. And recently, actually, I mentioned this in my Substack podcast that's going up in a few hours, which maybe you won't like this part. The big blockbuster movies recently have all begun with the Ellis Island immigrants. So, I mean, how many mob movies do we need? It used to be cowboys and Indians. Remember that was big. That's part of, early American history. But
right. And
but
also
no,
Italians did something after creating the mob. It's been several decades that the mob really hasn't existed. So there's like a big chunk also missing. Like they just weren't like, okay, organized crime failed, therefore kaputs, let's go back to Sicily and pack it in. I mean, I don't understand why that's the only Italian reference that there is. Yeah.
No, it's the immigrant thing. I mean, there was my big fat Greek wedding, and there's some Asian wedding or something, and it's heavily on immigrant movies now.
Yeah, there is not a one of like a WASP who really does well for himself and doesn't. But no, but it's even what was Oppenheimer was about, wasn't he an immigrant as well? I think Oppenheimer was an immigrant too.
He did invent the atom bomb, so he was a good immigrant.
I do credit them that it wasn't 19 black women sitting there doing the atom bomb with Oppenheimer just kind of rolling in the middle.
Did it actually show that?
No, it didn't. I'm making that up. There was no women of color sitting there and making the atom bomb. I think that it's an important question, though, with that they're trying to constantly say that these are the real freedom fighters. Whenever there's an internal national strife over anything, George Floyd, ICE, whatever, it's always, well, these people must be good because MLK would have marched with them.
Right. And again, as I described in my podcast going up soon, it's weird. There's a cutout for anything involving Black people, which I think is probably correct. They were brought here as slaves. They did get the short end of the stick for a couple of centuries, thanks to Democrats. Um, so, all these civil rights laws were abrogating the right of association in the Constitution, property rights in the Constitution. Even the civil rights law has been twisted to mean the exact opposite of what it says, because, yes, but Black people are involved, so we don't follow the law. We don't need to, because that is the only explanation for why no one else is pointing out that the two most heroic events in US history, according to liberals, were when Eisenhower and JFK sent federal troops to go against Democratic governors because they were not following federal law. And they weren't waiting for, ICE agents or whomever to be hit with shovels, to be hospitalized, to have frozen projectiles thrown at them, lasers at their eyes, for Antifa to move in. No, the governor and various private individuals simply were not following one Supreme Court decision. And that one Supreme Court decision, Brown versus Board of Education, I mean, that by itself, yes, Blacks had gotten the short end of the stick. We had to end segregation. But the reasoning is, I mean, it's like Roe v. Wade. Even if you support abortion, people would admit the reasoning is absurd. And the reasoning in Brown v. Board was separate but equal is inherently unequal. So separate but equal schools, schools for whites, schools for Blacks, is unconstitutional. Now, years later, now that I think that's kind of been taken care of. Oh, and footnote, Richard Nixon desegregated more schools than have been that were desegregated in American history before or since. Never will get credit for that. In any event, I think we can say now, as Clarence Thomas does all the time, the problem was the schools weren't equal. It
Mhm.
really wasn't that, as Thomas says, Black kids need to sit next to white kids in order to learn. And I mean,
Right.
you know this better than I do. I mean, all these private academies, I don't know if there are many still in existence, but I know there once were, that admit they tend to have Black male teachers and coaches, and they only admit young Black men. These
Mm.
have existed in the past. I don't know if any
They still
exist right now.
exist. They
And
still
they do
exist.
really well.
Yeah, and it's also, I mean, this is the whole lawsuit in California that my nonprofit's dealing with right now. There seems to be a unspoken right to be in close proximity to a white child. Like that is But that is their reasoning is that unless you are in a desk next to a white child, you have therefore unequal access to opportunity, even though all these kids in LA, I think it's $38,000 per year per pupil, have access. If you go back to the 1950s, 1940s, especially in the deep south, those schools really they didn't have plumbing. I mean, they had nothing. It was a completely unequal system back then, but it didn't call for but the logic therefore wasn't, well, then you must be forced to sit next to, a person of a different race. And I mean, so many the whole, I mean, going back to busing was such a failed experiment. Mayor John Lindsay ruined so many New York high schools by emphasizing this need to bus kids into neighborhoods that they had, they live hours away from at times in New York City gridlock traffic every morning at 6 a.m. It didn't improve grade scores whatsoever at all. Like nothing. It did literally nothing. And we've had decades of this.
Everybody hated it. I know Black people who were subjected to it and will say, I hated it. I had to get up at 6 a.m. every morning to ride for 2 hours on a bus just so I could sit next to white people.
And you know what's so funny? Wait, I was at Batia Ungar. She
Oh,
is a
yeah,
show news station.
she's great.
I went to her Shabbat dinner, and there was a Black gentleman there, and you came up as a topic, and that someone was asking about your opinion of civil rights, and he stopped the table conversation. Says Anne is so misunderstood. She's not, and she understands civil rights are for Black people and only Black
Yes.
people. And I was like, oh my gosh, wow, this guy's like paying attention to everything that Anne says. I had to bring that up because I thought it was so funny. But getting back to the immigration part of your article, what should be the federal response right now to these places just refusing to cooperate with the law?
Trump needs to pull all the troops back from these far-flung areas all over the world. He is make America great again, not make Bahrain again great again, or Belgium great again. I mean, our country is dying. We may not survive what Biden and 40 years of Democrats and Republicans did with immigration, changing the population so dramatically, more dramatic transformation of any country's population than at any time in history. And, Biden brought in 20 million so far, Trump, and, God bless him. I think he's doing his best. It seems like they have actually deported. I think it's like 650,000. There are another couple million who have self-deported. Okay, that is so not going to work. That is not going to
Mhm.
get the 20 million out. And then we're already 40 million. So you got to bring the troops home and send them to every sanctuary state in the union. And I mean, that only sounds extreme because everyone forgets Eisenhower. This was one Supreme Court case that this Democratic governors were ignoring, thinking that they could be sanctuaries from federal law. The Supreme Court has held more than a dozen times that immigration law is 100% the province of the federal government. Congress to write the law, the president to enforce the law. States, as you'll remember, when Chris Kobach wrote that Proposition 1070 for
70, yeah.
Arizona, which was not defying immigration or federal immigration law, it was complying with federal immigration law. But President Obama comes in and says, "Oh, no, but I'm the president and I don't want to enforce immigration
Mhm.
law." So he goes to the Supreme Court. Chuck Schumer is screaming, "This is an outrage. They're stepping on the province of the federal government. It's our right to enforce." I remember watching Luis Gutierrez smirking and mocking on TV, saying, and then they'll go to the Supreme Court and they will say, "Sorry, Arizona, supremacy clause." So they know what the supremacy clause is.
Yeah.
And over and over and over again, the Supreme Court has said, immigration law, this is the federal government's province, even when the state is trying to comply with federal government. And the president says, my discretion, I don't really want to enforce all those laws. Right now, I mean, it is so much more egregious than what Eisenhower sent the troops in for. And even to hear Trump talk about it, which is why I want conservatives to understand this. They should all be able to make this argument. And it has to be more than just Trump and Stephen Miller making the argument. Trump does not have to wait for things to get out of hand. Contrary to what these district courts have said, I mean, they act as if the only thing that counts as an insurrection is January 6th. And 9 sad people in Little Rock who wanted to go to the public high school. There were no agents being attacked. There was no vandalism. Okay, there might have been some rocks thrown and some nasty things said. Heckling, there was a lot of heckling. But it was private individuals and the governor of the state, Democratic governor, Democrats opposing Black kids going to white schools. And Eisenhower said, and I think Trump and his advisors should read those proclamations, that a few misguided individuals cannot be enough to stop the enforcement of federal law. And if the president doesn't step in, total anarchy will result. There was not
Right.
anarchy. There was
And
not burning down buildings. It was they weren't following one Supreme Court decision, and war hero Ike sends in the 101st Airborne.
And it's even more egregious now because it's when the governors don't do it, you have just random district attorneys announcing that their municipality or their county they will not follow immigration laws, immigration detainers. The Democrats had a big election victory in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, which is a county that Trump won. The DA's office flipped, and the DA said, "Well, we're not going to comply with ICE anymore." Excuse me? You're the district attorney for one county and you're just sitting there and saying, "No, the federal law doesn't matter to me anymore." I think that's completely insane that they do this. And you're right about the Supreme Court sitting there and saying that their states have no authority on this matter whatsoever. You don't control your own fiefdom because you're elected governor.
Yeah.
It's bizarre to me that they think that they are like the president of the state of Minnesota or the state of Maine or anything like that.
No, I mean, if anything, I mean, there are carve outs. The Supreme court didn't say this, though Scalia did. Yeah, of course the states should have the right to exclude people. They ought to be able to go beyond immigration law and have their own, no, we don't want you living in our state. I mean, talk about tradition. They absolutely did that in colonial times. It was called, what was it? The something outlaw. But if you couldn't just wander from town to town because they would take care of their own widows and orphans.
Mhm.
And so if you walked into the next town, Vermont was, I think I cited this in Adios America. Vermont was particularly aggressive. You wander to the next town, they'd come and check you out, the town elders, to see if you could support yourself. And if you couldn't, they'd say, move along, Buster. So
Mhm.
you ought to have the right by common sense, by constitutional law, by our nation's history, for a state to go extra and say, you may have let these people in, federal government, but we're not letting them in because we don't want to have to support them. Okay, the Supreme Court doesn't actually agree with me on that yet. They say federal government wins, federal government wins, federal government wins, but I may as well get in what I think the real Constitution should be.
Right. And the thing is that if these municipalities or these states comply with immigration laws and ICE detainers, there wouldn't need to be this giant show of force from ICE. There is not a giant show of force from ICE in most parts of Texas or Florida, for example, where they're having these, conflicts, these huge conflicts, because when an illegal is getting arrested, they're going to ICE to be deported immediately. I mean, there's a
Uh-huh.
huge turnover, and that's why Florida and Texas lead in the number one and number two state with the most illegals being deported right now in it. I think it was from January to October was 30,000 out of Texas and something like 23,000 out of Florida, and then California's below, which is crazy given how many more people are there. But that's why these conflicts are being set up the way that they are, is because they're not even trying to get out the criminal portion. Like,
Yes.
forget about like the cleaning lady. They don't want the criminals to leave. That's
Yeah.
what are missing in this entire thing.
Yes. And if they did just hand over their criminals, eh, you really wouldn't have to worry about, the lovely cleaning lady everybody's worried about being
Yeah. Yeah.
chased
No.
down because and they're just being handed over. They get to sit in a nice jail, get their 3 squares a day, and if there's any question about whether they're a citizen or not, there's plenty of time to check that out.
Right. And also, and I don't know if you saw this or you remember seeing this, but there was George Stephanopoulos was on ABC, on a show on ABC, and he was talking about, this was when the National Guard were being sent into Illinois or California or something like that. And George Stephanopoulos, being the historian he is, said that a president has never defied a state's order not to send in the National Guard, which obviously he said that on air. In
Whoa!
the case of Arkansas, I promise you, Dwight Eisenhower did not have the authority of the governor of Arkansas to send in the National Guard.
And
The media,
Wallace standing in the schoolhouse door, they were expressly sending in troops because of what the Democratic governors were saying and doing and standing in the schoolhouse door. I described this in the in my podcast going up later, but there's a New York Times editorial about this. They at least are smarter than George Stephanopoulos, but how do they get around this sticky wicket? So they had an editorial when the troops first went into LA. And they mention Eisenhower and, of course, JFK, who somehow was more heroic. Even though he was a
well,
Democrat going after a Democrat. Eisenhower had already done it. So obviously what Eisenhower did was more courageous and powerful. Yet and still, how does the New York Times explain this? They cite it and then say, but segregationists and I don't know if he said conservatives, they couldn't have said Republicans, conservatives howled about it then, and they're still howling about it.
right,
Well,
of
okay,
course.
is that part of the constitutional law or your analysis, New York Times? When nobody is howling about it. So,
Yes.
so factually false. But let's say you're right, New York Times. When conservatives howl about something, that means we don't enforce the Constitution. Is that it? No, they just slip that in. And I wonder how many of these great, educated New York Times readers, their eyes just go over that sentence and, oh yeah, that doesn't count because conservatives howled.
Well, then that's their way of getting around it. But you tweeted over the last week about CNN's coverage of the immigration news. The fact that there are people who go on network news, cable news, and say that crossing the border is not a crime it's truly actually astounding, where it is not just informed opinion, it is what I wish the world to be. And they don't have, I mean, I don't think MSNBC or CNN even have anyone on who know a thing about immigration law.
Or maybe they know and they're aggressively lying, but,
That's
I think we
true.
have the answer for why they won't put me on TV anymore. And
But
probably
yeah,
you, Ryan, because there
uh,
was a conservative, not our love, but someone I'd never seen before, a little gal and her heart's in the right place, but she doesn't know immigration law either. So when this
oh, I
John
know her.
Sarah
She's a sweet
Scheinlin,
person. Yeah.
yeah, okay, thanks
She's
for
trying. She's
Thanks for
trying,
your
but
enthusiasm. But there's a reason they won't put on people who actually know the law, because Shira Scheinlin is saying, no, if you, I hate this line, that if you illegal alien, as long as they step across the border and request asylum, well, okay, you got every immigrant rights group out there whom we're paying for through the NGOs, handing them out forms explaining, I mean, this is in Adios America. They actually have tape recordings where they're supposed to memorize what their alleged persecution is, and they
right.
write down the exact words for the illegals. So as soon as they walk right up to the border agents and say, "I'm requesting asylum." Okay, well, under federal law, then I sent out the law last night. No, you have to be detained. The word is shall. It's not may. And Judge Scheinlin, I think it's Scheinlin. She's saying, no, they don't have to be detained. You can be. It's may. It says may, not shall. No, it very clearly says shall.
Yeah, and
President
even
Biden
in
and Mayorkas were openly defying federal law for 4 years.
and the crazy thing is the fact that I mean, can Mayorkas be held in contempt or something? Or why? I think the oversight committee should actually be holding him over for the remaining of the year and ask him how did he let this complete invasion. We never had someone as bad as him at the head of DHS ever. I mean, even under Obama, they were not like. I mean, he was openly rooting for an invasion. I've never thinking back to how insane it was, and he was there all 4 years. Biden never fired him, which is the
Right.
crazier part of the whole thing.
Yeah.
Now, I want to ask you. So there's a lot of
I've
polls
written
coming
2
out.
columns on that, by the way. I think, I know Trump has his hands full, so we may have to rely on President J.D. Vance to do this, because there's no statute of limitations on murder. I think, for one thing, Sergeant James Byrd, who committed cold-blooded murder against Ashley Babbitt, ought to be tried for murder. And I also think, Mayorkas could be tried for accessory to murder, conspiracy to murder. He knew damn well who was coming in, that they were murderers. They came in, they murdered Americans. These are at least legal theories
Mm, it'd
that
be an
aren't
interesting case.
absurd.
Right. Well, there's all these polls coming out right now that's saying that ICE is having a negative opinion by most Americans. And I was thinking about talking to you about this right before I was reading the polls. And it is kind of amazing how much the Republican Party has changed in the sense that there is no signaling whatsoever that from politicians, even from very wishy-washy politicians, that we should stop having ICE raids and that we should scale back ICE. I mean, there really has been a dramatic transformation in 10 years, wouldn't you say?
It's night and day. I was banned from Fox for Adios America. Now they have, specific immigration reporters, and I have to say, they're doing a great job. A little late for me, but at least people can see what the truth is out there. And Twitter is pretty great. Elon sounds like he's reading straight from Adios America, and it's amazing. It's like nothing I've ever seen.
What could Trump still be doing that he hasn't done?
Bring the troops home and send them to every sanctuary city, state, DA's office. He really should do that. This is crazy that we have troops in far-flung places around the world just waiting for, the armchair warriors to leap on TV and start telling us about the difference between Sunni and Shia, and this faction and that faction. And no, how about our country?
Right. That should be
We're
the
not
theme
going
of
to be able to be the world's policeman if we become Uganda. Liberals,
That's true.
Republican warmongers. It's the gravy train's almost over. You really ought to think about saving this country.
Yeah, and that actually would be a great slogan for a presidential race. What about this country? I mean, that it really is great. Well, what he should do is bring the troops home. What everyone should do is subscribe to Unsafe with Ann Coulter. It is a fantastic Substack. I am a paid subscriber. And thank you for being on this podcast.
Thank you for having me, Ryan Jadusky.
Now it's time for Ask Me Anything. If you want to be part of the Ask Me Anything segment, email me Ryan at numbersgamepodcast.com. That's Ryan at pluralnumbersgamepodcast.com. This question comes from Brian. For those who don't know, those in the Ryan community shame the name Brian. But anyway, Brian, I love you for listening. He says, Hi, Ryan. I like your data driven method of analysis and listen to all your podcasts. Brian, I very much appreciate that. I have a question and a couple of friendly jabs. What is your opinion of polling averages like what is available at Real Clear Politics? Okay. I like Real Clear Politics, especially because they've been around for so long. And it's good as a reference point to look back at old data. The problem with Real Clear Politics polling is one, they are highly selective of which polls they include in their polling averages. And sometimes I think some polls should be included that are not making the cut. Secondly, their methodology of how they accumulate their averages is that it's on like a monthly basis. So when you see the snapshot of like what the numbers are, it's from the last, I think it's 4 weeks, I believe, maybe it's 5 weeks, but it's like 4 weeks of polling. And so when that time changes, let's say you have a consistent, poll where Trump is getting 45%, and then you see one outlier where he's at 32 or something like that. And the averages dip very low. That outlier will hold averages down for a very, very long time because they're not continually updated. Nor is there a lot of new polling firms, what they do are not polling firms, but a lot of new digital media companies that accumulate polling information, they weight the polls based on the poll's accuracies. So if a polling firm, which is always inaccurate, puts out a poll and Trump's at 75% or 20%, they will not weight it for the same value that a poll that's usually right or right more than it's wrong does. So they'll put that poll more weight towards the median and towards the mean rather, and the average than Real Clear Politics is. So not weighting their polls, I think, is a big problem. And two, when when a new poll will show up, which like for YouGov does a poll a week, they will just drop the last poll, put the next poll up. Well, okay, that's fine. But if there's a big swing one to the other, the last poll shouldn't be completely forgotten. Like they should have it, but maybe not count as much. It's fine. Like it's a fine resource. It shouldn't be your only resource. They get a little high on their own supply. But I like them, but I do think that there's a little few flaws in their way they sit there and they do their polling methodology and how they do their polling averages. Second question, why do you say sit there so often? I have some friends from upstate New York and they regularly use that phrase. I don't know. And let me tell you, reading this email right before we went on, I'm going to really try because it's more than one person who says that I say the word sit there very, very frequently. I've had that for a while, and I have tried to work on not using certain phrases consistently. This is going to have to be one of them. I don't know why I do this. I have no explanation. I am sure people in my family say it, and I don't even recognize it. No, I have weeded myself out of using the words like whatchamacallit or not for nothing, other things that people around me say all the time. I don't say them anymore very frequently. Sit there is apparently one of them. So thank you for pointing that out. I'm going to monitor my speech in great detail going forward. Finally, there's no Z in electricity. I use Z in electricity? Maybe it's my enunciation. Brian, a part of it you have to understand is I am from New York City, right? There's whole vowels and consonants that I don't say at all. I mean, and I'm from here, like generationally from here. So like there is absolutely no way you could hold me responsible for the English language. My grandma made up Italian words and told me them as if they were true. And I have lived like that, thinking an entire thing is I've got curse words that I still say that she told me were Italian, and my friends and say those are not real words. So you can't hold me to like not being able to speak proper English or the King's language. I'm just not there. I try. I work on myself. This is like therapy, but I apologize. I don't think I said Z in electricity. If I did, I thank you for pointing that out, and I will try to do better in the future. All right, guys. Thank you for listening to this podcast. I really appreciate it. If you like, please like and subscribe in the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. If you're feeling generous, a 5-star review goes a long way to making sure people understand where to find this show and click on it and be great for me. Thank you guys so much. I'll talk to you guys on Wednesday.